So last time we had the following important properties. One, uniform convergence. Preserves continuity. That was the first major advantage of uniform continuity. And of course, important simple thing is analogously, we can show that uniform convergence preserves semi-continuity. That is, if the sequence is all lower semi-continuous and if it is uniformly convergent, the limit will also be lower semi-continuous. And if the sequence is upper semi-continuous and it is converging uniformly, then the limit function will also be upper semi-continuous. So it preserves semi-continuity. And then we had that the limit of a uniformly bounded non-decreasing sequence of continuous functions is a bounded lower semi-continuous function. Here it's only the point-wise limit, not necessary. Because once you have uniform limit, then much more, you have continuity. But even if you did not have uniform convergence, but if you had point-wise limit, you will at least be guaranteed lower semi-continuity. And so this is the level at which it had reached. I might not have proved many of these things, but this is the line in which it goes. I may indicate some of these proofs shortly, but I want to complete the line of thinking first. Then what we want to do is we go back and analyze what is it that we are asking in uniform convergence. Okay. So what are we demanding for uniform convergence? Let me first write that. So Fn converges to F uniformly all n some set S, okay, S to R. If this is our definition, we already have this. If for every epsilon greater than 0, there exists a positive integer n. I'll write the formal definition first, such that n and m greater than or equal to n. We don't even need f, we all want this quotient. Mod fnx minus fmx is less than epsilon for every x in S. Okay, so fn mapping S to R, fn converges uniformly on S, if this happens. This is what we want in uniform convergence. What do we mean by this? Now we start looking at it in a very colloquial term language, so that we understand. So what we are asking is, asking error between terms beyond a certain stage, error between terms beyond a certain stage can be controlled. Controlled globally, wherever you are, for all x in Yes, so globally you can control. This is what we really do. Globally, we are able to control the error by one stage. That's what we are asking in uniform convergence. But now we start asking, are we asking too much? It may be that when I am concentrating on a point, locally we are able to control the error. Perhaps we are not able to control the error globally. Okay? So perhaps we are asking too much. That's why you don't get very often we don't get uniform convergence, because we are asking too much. We are asking moon. We don't reach the moon all the time. Okay? So let's relax this condition. Now what do you mean by relax? What I mean say is, suppose I take at a point xi. What I am saying is, if I look at xi all the way to the right, to the left, as far as the set S goes, I must have control. Maybe in a small neighborhood I have this control. Maybe given xi in S, maybe there exists a delta positive such that in this local neighborhood Fn converges to, of course, let's take the part of S in this, because we have to worry only about those points of S where Fn's are defined. Okay, that's where it's defined. So in S intersection S, those points of S which are in this interval, those are the neighborhoods of xi in S. Fn converges to F uniform. Who knows? Maybe at different points you are allowed different levels of visibility of uniform convergence. At this point, maybe I can look little bit this side and that side getting. At another point, maybe a little more. At another point, little less. So maybe I am getting only this sort of localized uniform convergence. What does this mean? So this means the following: given epsilon, given xi, there exists delta positive such that in this I have uniform convergence. That is, for every epsilon positive, there exists a state n such that n and m greater than or equal to n implies mod fnx minus fx fmx is less than epsilon, but not for all x in S now, but for all x in S and x belong to xi minus delta. This perhaps is a little bit better requirement to do. The other one happens, this automatically happens. But this may happen without the other one happen. We may not have global control, but may have local control.
Probably in the limiting function there will not be discontinuity here.
Yes?
In the limiting function,
Yes.
at xi there will not be discontinuity.
Yes. That's what we are eventually going to look at. Okay. Now, what I am saying is, we will relax even this. We will even relax this. Okay. What we are saying is, there is one neighborhood of xi in which we can control the error to any extent we want. Whatever epsilon you give, we are able to control the error. We will be even a little bit more considerate and say, for every error, if there is some interval in which I can control the error, that's even better. Okay. So let's even relax this. Instead of same delta working for all epsilon. Now we are no longer asking uniform convergence, we are asking less. For epsilon, let's say we have delta adjusted with epsilon. What do we mean by this? So finally we get this. What we want is, given xi in S and any epsilon positive, depending on the error that you have in mind, I will choose the neighborhood in which I will be able to control the error. Okay. There exists delta positive and positive integer n such that n and m greater than or equal to n, x belongs to S, mod x minus I less than delta implies mod fn x minus fn x. So what is happening is, here is the point. Let's take for a simplicity, let us take the set S to be an interval. Okay. What I am saying is, take any point xi. You play the error card, epsilon. The moment you play the error card, I will decide on my delta card and fix that interval xi minus delta and xi plus delta. I am going to do double calculations in my mind the moment you play the epsilon. The moment you play the epsilon, I am going to do one part of the mind is going to do a calculation on delta, and the other part of the mind is going to calculate on that positive integer n. Then I will find an n. Then in this interval, wherever you look, the error will be less than epsilon. That's what, and that is what is a very strange notion called uniform convergence at a point. That's a bad terminology, but that's a standard terminology. Okay. So we now define, this is called uniform convergence at the point. It's a bad word for uniform, but anyway, that's what is used. Definition: a sequence Fn is said to converge uniformly at psi. Take S to be generally an intro, in rare cases we get to very complex. At psi belongs to S if that definition. You play the epsilon card, I will find two cards. One is the one is a real number delta positive and another one is a positive integer n, such that whenever you are beyond that stage and you are in that interval within that distance, then fn. As you observed, all these are manipulated to get continuity. So, that is what is known as. Now, we can show that if you have a sequence of continuous functions, and it converges uniformly at the point xi, then at that point the limit function will be continuous. So let me write that. Now I can come to so you have a sequence of continuous functions and Fn converges to a point. So that the function f(x) and Fn converges uniformly at the point xi. With that definition, then all that will imply that f is. So what it really says is, we are not using so much of the information that is contained in uniform convergence to conclude continuity at f equal to xi. We are only using part of the information that is there in uniform convergence to conclude continuity. So to get the continuity preserved at the limit, at the point xi in the limit function, you don't need the full power of uniform convergence. You need only this little simple piece that in the neighborhood of xi, reasonable control is possible. That's what is eventually the necessary thing. Okay. So that is the first part, fairly.
So is the converse true?
Exercise. The converse true exercise. Put all the epsilons and deltas together. Okay. See whether you get it. Right. What was it? I lost it. Okay. Now the something strange happens. That's the next result that I am going to state. Okay. These are, I may not, I don't know whether I am going to prove or I may not even prove all proofs and exercises. Okay. I may put the proofs in the notes. Now I decided that handwritten notes would be first scanned and put on the now suppose I have this situation. Again I have this. I know that Fn is converged to point. So I have a sequence of functions which converge pointwise to f. This says that the points at which I get uniform convergence. Now I have the notion of uniform convergence at a point. So I know that I have point-wise convergence in S. Now I am going to look at those points where I will have uniform convergence. Uniform convergence at those points. Because if I had uniform convergence at those points, continuity of Fn would imply continuity at that point. Now, where are those points? Will I get any point of? I know that the limit, if Fn's are continuous, and if nice at least monotonicity etc. are there, the limit function will be semi-continuous. But if I had some kind of uniform convergence at some point, at least those points will give me continuity if the original functions were all continuous. So the question is, are there points of uniform convergence at all? It turns out, even though we have two situations. One is, uniform convergence always implies point-wise convergence. And we saw the examples where point-wise convergence need not imply uniform convergence. So it looks like point-wise convergence is bad. It may not always imply uniform convergence, and therefore I may have problems about concluding about continuity of the limit functions. But it is not that bad. What happens is, there are lots of points where I get uniform convergence. So what do I mean by this? If I have a sequence of functions which are convergent pointwise, then in every interval open AB in S. Of course, okay, AB just that AB intersection S is not empty. See, what I am saying that you must work with the topology of S. Okay, with the topology of S is just intersection with open intervals in coming from the open intervals. Otherwise, if you don't like it, take S as a interval itself and just concentrate on it. If I have a sequence of functions defined in an interval and mapping to R and F1 converges to F, then in every sub-interval which is contained in S, there is at least one xi belonging to S where Fn converges uniformly. At which point the Fn and therefore if Fn's were continuous, so what does this say? This says the points, if you have pointwise convergence, then the points at which you have uniform convergence are densely distributed. Wherever you go, you will find points at which they are uniformly converged. So essentially, we'll sum it up by saying that the theorem 4, 5, Fn mapping S to R, F map S to R, and Fn tends to F pointwise implies the set of points at which Fn converges uniformly is dense. In every interval you will find. This is not easy to prove. But it's a bit of clever estimations and things like that. Okay. And therefore, what is a consequence of this theorem? Now, put the additional hypothesis that Fn's are also continuous. Suppose Fn's are continuous, then Fn converges uniformly, and at any point if it converges uniformly, F must be continuous at that. That we can conclude. Because whenever it converges uniformly at a point, continuity is preserved at that point. And therefore it says, if I had put additional condition that Fn is continuous here, then I will get the set of points where it is, the limit function is continuous or dense. In every interval you will find a point where uniform continuity is there, and therefore you will get continuity. So the next conclusion of that, the consequences. 1. Okay? Fn mapping to S to R, continuous, F mapping S to R, Fn converges to F pointwise, implies the set of points at which F is continuous is a dense set. Because at every point in this dense set it is continuous now. Additional, the continuity forces at each one of these points in the dense set, continuity also I get because of the earlier theorem. Therefore, it's not that bad. Continuity may be lost, but it's not going to be lost so badly. It will be preserved at a dense set of points. So it is not that you must always fall upon uniform convergence and work with that. Even point-wise convergence has a lot of advantages. I mean, it occurs more often than uniform convergence, but even in that case, there are certain things that are reasonably preserved. In a dense set of points, the function is continuous. Okay? So that is the ultimate thing, in the sense that point-wise convergence preserves continuity at a dense set of points. Point-wise convergence preserves continuity, probably not at all points, but at least at a dense set of points. A further consequence of this, what about points of discontinuities? So, we already know that the points of continuity form a dense set. It's likely that the points of discontinuity also form a dense set. Okay, it may be split into two dense sets. But you may say that there are too many points where it is bad. Forget about it. There are too many points where it is good. Look at it. That's what I am trying to say. There are quite a large number of points where it is good. But what about the bad points? What can we say about the bad points? Well, without any information, I know that the points of discontinuity of any function must be an F sigma set. That we have proved. So, a priori, the points of discontinuity of F is known to be an F sigma set. Okay, this is a theorem which we proved 2 or 3 classes back. For any function, the set of points is a discontinuity. Then, we also said, we also knew, at least we said that any F sigma set is either first category or contains an interval. Now this additional information says it cannot contain an interval, because any interval report there will be a point of continuity going and sitting there. So the discontinuities cannot contain an interval. So this is ruled out. This is ruled out now, since every interval contains a point of continuity. So therefore, the set of points of discontinuity must be an F sigma set of first category. So that's what we can do. We can now have a double conclusion. Not only we can say something about points of continuity, we also say something about points of discontinuity. And the set of points at which F is discontinuous is an F sigma set of first category. See, there is a question about this big and large. How big is big? In what context? Yeah.
So if S is a closed interval, then the set of points where F is continuous
Yes.
will be second category.
Hmm? Yes. Set of all points, because if both are
Both are
first category, then it will become
closed
as a
interval.
complete material. Yes, certainly, yes. So therefore, I said that this could be big, that could be big. Now what is big and what is small? Now big as a set, as what? What do you mean by big as a set? Now how do I say a set is big or not? I have to measure it. Some way I have to say this is a big set if this happens. Well, set theoretically, a set is big if it is infinite. Well, it may turn out that both are infinite. Set of points of continuity are infinite. The set of points of discontinuity may also be infinite. But then the notion of continuity itself is a topological notion. Okay. So there must be some topological way of saying big and small. Topologically, first category sets are considered small because the union of nowhere dense sets. Right? So therefore, they are made up of small irrelevant sets. Together they may be big set theoretically, but topologically they are unions of nowhere dense sets. The first category sets are small. So we draw conclusion, we give definitions and look at things which make us happy. Topologically, therefore, the points at where discontinuity comes in the end is small. Somehow or other cooked up a notion of big and small, where we feel happy now. Things go wrong, but they don't go wrong that badly. They go wrong only in a small set. Topologically small set. The places where the continuity is not maintained is a set of first category. The sets of second category are supposed to be big sets topologically. So the problem is big and small are only relative depending on what is in your mind. If you are a topologist, something is big, but the same thing is small. If you are a measure theorist, the same thing is big. If it is a if you are a set theorist. So question is, you have to be very specific. Since continuity is a topological notion, it is better to bring in a topological notion of big and small. And one very classical one is this category. And it turns out that the discontinuity points are of first category. Therefore, basically what it says is, convergence eventually preserves your, they keep saying, that the karma doesn't leave you. It will be there on a dense set of points, and where you have escaped it is only a topological small set. That's what that's what the moral of the story is. Yes, you could have altered it in some places, but you could alter it only in a set of first category. Okay, so that is the full story about what happens in convergence. And this is all, I think, a very nice classical piece in classical analysis. Probably, I think the beginning of the 20th century, the first quarter of the 20th century, was the golden age of modern analysis. Some brilliant pieces of theorems that came.
Sir, Cantor set is first category.
I'm not yet started about Cantor set. Okay. I'll come to that. That is the ultimate in all these glories. Okay.
We can have uncountable first category.
Yeah, that's what I said. They're theoretically big. So therefore you got to be very, very careful when you say big and small. What is big in one sense may not be big in another sense. What is big in one sense is small is in another sense. Okay. You can have a very huge set, but it may topologically a first category set. And continuity being a topological idea, in that sense it's small. Cantor set is one who really created a world, one small universe where you can pull out counter examples and examples like nobody's business. Okay, that's one of the biggest sources of all such examples. I'll discuss Cantor set after some time. Right. Okay, I think I will hold the proof for all this. The idea, the line of thinking is very clear. So therefore, uniform convergence is the best type of convergence we can ask. And if you extract the essence of uniform convergence from the point of view of preserving continuity at the point, the uniform convergence at a point is enough to preserve continuity. And if you don't want, if you say that you have only convergence only, still there is a certain amount of reassurance that at a good set of points you will still have continuity. And the set of points where you don't have are topologically small. This is the model of this whole work. Right. There are many other notions of continuity. There is, we'll come to one by one. There is this notion of equal continuity, there is notion of absolute continuity, there is notion of hemi-continuity, demi-continuity, umpteen number of continuities. Basically what it means, you have some notion of measuring the error. In that notion, if you can make things small, you have that notion continuity. That's all. It's only a question of how you are going to quantify your error. In some sense or the other, I can make error small, then I have continuity. Okay. Next, since he asked me this question last time, I will talk about eco-continuity. The next question, that notion I am going to introduce is eco-continuity. Alright, so before I look at why do I need that notion of equality, because it is not that something is, mathematicians actually are very lazy fellows. They won't introduce something unless that is absolutely necessary. Only at that stage they will introduce that notion and the definition. Now, let me start off with this following situation. Suppose, let's even consider a simpler situation so that we at present do not get lost in too much detail. Suppose let us take this interval AB. Even take 0, 1, a closed interval. Because any closed interval can be rescaled to 0, 1. So let us take a finite closed interval 0, 1. Now, let us take the collection of all real valued continuous functions on 0. So it is the set of all f having 0, 1 to R, f continuous. So we are considering all continuous functions on 0, 1 and taking that collection. Now clearly this is a vector space over the real number. Sum of two continuous functions is continuous and a constant multiple of the continuous functions is continuous. So this is even a vector space. CR 0, 1. We will not use the vector space structure at this moment. We are going to use only the metric space structure of that. We don't even need vector space. So what we do is, if you take f at g in this space, then f minus g is also a continuous function. F minus g is also a continuous function. Take any two continuous function, the difference is a continuous function. And we saw quite some time back that if you have a continuous function on a complex set, it is bounded. Okay? So it has a maximum, it has a minimum. So therefore, implies max f minus g exists. Okay, what does that mean? It means there exists a point x naught in 0, 1 such that fx minus gx is less than or equal to fx naught minus gx naught for every x. Okay? And similarly, there exists max and min. There exists x naught prime such that fx minus gx is greater than or equal to fx naught minus fx prime. What it really says is that function fx minus gx is bounded on either side. Upper bound is there, lower bound is there, it is attained. And therefore, mod fx minus gx is also a continuous. Of course, this has nothing to do. If fx minus gx is continuous, mod fx minus gx is also a continuous. It has a maximum, right? Every continuous function is a maximum. Therefore, there exists finally a xi in 0, 1 such that mod fx minus gx is less than or equal to f xi minus g xi. Call this number, that maximum number, as the df, the distance between f and g. So if we have two functions, continuous functions f and g, then the distance between these two functions is defined as follows. Basically, what does it mean? I have 0, 1, I draw the graph of f, it's something like this. I draw the graph of g, it's something like that. What you do is at each point, see what is the vertical distance between the two curves, and there is a maximum among all those things. Take that as the ultimate. So you are playing it very safe. What is the, how far, what is the maximum these two curves can stay apart? So therefore we define dfg as the maximum of mod f minus g, fx minus gx, x belonging to Okay, if you don't have closed bounded intervals, you take any interval, then you have to take bounded continuous functions and define it as a supremum. Let's make things like easier to start with. You just take this 0, 1. It turns out this is a metric. It turns out that this is a metric on here. What is that? It's very easy to verify because the maximum of positive quantity it's non-negative. It has to be 0. The maximum is 0. That means at every point it must be 0. That means fx must be equal to gx. So the two functions are. And the triangle inequality follows almost. Triangle inequality is real numbers and then taking the maximum. So this is and it's symmetric. F minus g is the same as g minus f modulus. So d of g. So this is a metric. Now this is also a vector space, so I will exploit that to make some of my things writing easy. Okay, you can do it without that, but then so therefore I have a metric space CR0. This D is, I will call it D infinity, because there are other metrics in space. This is the metric. Now my standard model for a metric space, the whole idea started with the real line. What is the usual of xy is mod x. Now we have the notion of compactness, bounded, closed, all kinds of ideas. What is a bounded set? Suppose I say S is a bounded set in R. What do I mean?
I mean, I can find M such that mod of that should be less than M.
Yes. So I can find a positive real number M, that mod S is less than or equal to M for every S in that. Other way of looking at it is, I can, with 0 at the center, I have the advantage of the 0 here. Okay? 0 at the center, I can draw a big closed interval so that all the points lie in that. So let me use that idea itself. So we can find an M such that M positive, such that S is contained in minus M. Then we say it is bounded. Now I will write this interval minus M in the metric language so that I can carry over here. So I can write this as what? As the sphere, center 0, radius M, but it is the closed sphere. Okay, the boundary is included. That is what it is, that's my notation. Okay, the closed sphere, that is, what is this notation stand for? The set of all x in R such that dx0 is less than or equal to M. See, that is the. Now I know how to define bounded sets here. So what should be bounded sets in this space? So let S be a subset of CR0, 1. What is meant by a subset of this? It is some collection of continuous functions on 0, 1. So I am taking some, you can think of it as a sequence of continuous functions. That collection could be a sequence. So I am taking a collection of continuous functions on 0. Now I say S is bounded there exists an M. See, I'm a little bit lazy here. I should have written it in the metric space language, but I borrowed this, such that this S is contained in D, but S, M. What is the zero here now?
Constant function zero.
The zero function. What does this mean? This is the sphere, the set of all F in CR01 such that the distance from F to 0 is less than or equal to M. Right? Now what is that distance? This is F such that the maximum of mod Fx minus 0 is less than or equal. Right? If we can find an M such that S is contained in this sphere, then I should say S is a bounded set. What does that mean? This means F belongs to S implies the maximum of mod Fx x belongs to 0, 1 must be less than or equal to M. And this must work for all F in S. So in other words, we are able to find one bound. So okay, let me write this again. This says mod maximum itself is less than or equal to M for all x. So what it says is, you choose any function and any point, the modulus will be always less than or equal to M. This is what is known as S is a uniformly bounded set of functions. We say F is a uniformly bounded set of continuous functions. Bounded means mod Fx must be less than or equal to M. Uniformly means the same bound works for all the functions in that set. So this is what is known as S is a uniformly bounded set of continuous functions. So let me write that notation. So this is the definition. A subset S of CR01 is called a uniformly bounded set of continuous functions on 0, 1 if there exists an M greater than 0 such that mod Fx is less than or equal to M for every F in S and for every X in 0. One bound works for all the points and all the functions. So boundedness is what is in the boundedness concept as a metric space concept boils down to uniform boundedness concept if you are dealing with the metric space of continuous. So now, in the real line, I have the notion of compact sets. And we found that every closed and bounded set in the real line is a compact set. We also found that in a general metric space, it is not necessary that a closed and bounded set is compact. We needed what is known as totally bounded. Okay. So therefore, in this metric space of continuous function, is uniformly bounded same as totally bounded? If so, then I can say that every closed and uniformly bounded set of continuous functions is a compact set. However, it turns out it is not so. Uniform boundedness does not mean total boundedness. What then means? What is the missing part? Just by having uniform boundedness, I am not going to have total boundedness. But total boundedness always implies uniform boundedness. And also we will have to see, but I assume that the terminology is so threatening. Total boundedness is better be bounded, like uniformly bounded. So, total boundedness implies uniform boundedness. But uniform boundedness does not imply, we will see some examples later. Uniform boundedness does not imply total boundedness. So, we have to add some more muscle power to this uniform boundedness to get to total boundedness. And what is that muscle power? That is the equicontinuity. If you add that the family is also equicontinuous in addition to uniformly bounded, then that will make it totally bounded. So what do I write there? Can I erase all these things? Not every uniformly bounded family of continuous functions on 0, 1 is a totally bounded subset of the metric space Phi R. The additional requirement. When I say additional, it means in addition to uniform boundedness. The additional requirement is that the family be uniformly equicontinuous. Now, what is equicontinuous? It is essentially uniformly continuous. So, every function in the family is continuous on 0, 1, and any function which is continuous in a compact set is uniformly continuous. So, every function is uniformly continuous in 0, 1. Therefore, one delta works for one f. But what we are saying, the same delta works for all f. So, it is uniformly continuous. So, what is the definition of equicontinuity? So, equicontinuity means S contained a family of continuous functions on 0, 1 is said to be equicontinuous if for every epsilon greater than 0 there exists one delta greater than 0 which depends only on epsilon, such that whenever x1 and x2 are within delta, fx1 and fx2 will be within epsilon for all f in S. That's what the equivalent. Uniformly. So what we have claimed here is that uniform bounded and equicontinuous implies total boundedness. And in fact, consistent. That is precisely the characterization of the notion of total boundedness in the concrete metric space of continuous function. So total boundedness, and so therefore if you take a set S which is uniformly bounded, which is totally bounded, which means which is uniformly bounded and equicontinuous, its closure will be compact, because its closure will be a closed set, and this uniform boundedness and equicontinuity will be maintained even in the closed level, because this convergence are all uniform in this space. Therefore the closure will be compact. Therefore what is a compact set in the space of continuous functions? They are a uniformly bounded, equicontinuous, closed set is a compact set in the space of CR01. And it is this that is very strongly used in the famous Ascoli's theorems in finding the solutions of differential equations, etc. That you always show that you have an approximation which is equicontinuous, uniformly bounded, and therefore it will have the compactness in metric spaces eventually leads to every sequence will have a convergent subsequence. So even though you make an approximation that may not converge, some subsequence will converge uniformly to the solution that you want. This is the standard trick in all these proofs of solution by iterative methods. Okay. So therefore, the net theorem, this is essentially Ascoli's theorem. We'll see it later. Ascoli's theorem that a subset or a family of continuous functions is totally bounded. This is the essence of Ascoli's theorem. The way it's stated is different. If and only if it is uniformly bounded. Okay. So you have a complete characterization of compact sets on the CR01, which are all essentially very fundamental results. Okay. Now, of course, one thing I should have mentioned is that in CR01, convergence in CR01 means uniform convergence. Because convergence in CR01 means maximum itself converges. That means that epsilon, that n which works for the maximum will work for all the other fellows. So essentially the one n works for all the x's, so you get uniform convergence. So convergence, that is one great advantage of this space, that convergence is uniform convergence. And therefore it's a complete space. Because if you have a sequence of functions which converge in this metric, the limit function will also be continuous, because uniform convergence preserves continuity. Therefore CR01 will be a complete metric space. Okay. So that's the criterion for compactness on CR01. I have not proved anything, I am just that's much better than getting into all the epsilon delta proof. Sometimes we like to see the proof, but the train of thought is this. So there is this continuity on the one side, then the semi-continuity and the lower levels of continuity on the other side. Then you have families and the whole thing being continuous with one stroke is the other side. With better and better levels of continuity. The more you have, the better things you get. The less you have to move around saying, well, it's not that bad, still I can get some results. Now I want to perhaps at this stage I have to decide what route I take. Okay. I will discuss something about metric spaces, the compactness, the role of compactness in metric spaces, which can be looked in many ways. Okay. The role of which can be looked into purely from the fact that it is bounded, it is totally bounded closed set, or it can be looked at as every open cover as a finite subcover. That is a topological definition because that works without the metric. The moment you have the notion of open sets, you can define compactness. Set is said to be compact if every open cover has a finite subcover. Then that, in terms of the metric space languages, all that can be translated into totally bounded and closed sets. I look at it in a slightly different manner, and finally all that will boil, all these things put together will boil down to certain types of applications, how they use in differential equations and in general functional equations, how they use this idea to prove existential theorems. After that, I will very quickly go through the notion of derivatives. So we have seen continuity, various notions of continuity, and what happens to continuity in limiting processes. Then we look at the derivative, and then look at what happens to derivative in limiting processes. Okay. If there is problem even maintaining continuity, there is going to be a problem maintaining derivatives. Okay. So, should look at various aspects. These continuous functions, let me make one comment here. There are lots of times. One way to, if you want to get to the so-called LP spaces and L2 spaces and L1 spaces, is a lot of measure theory has to be introduced and integration has to be introduced, etc., etc. At least to get intuitively a feeling for what these spaces are, we can approach continuous function everybody understands. This metric space, maximum metric everybody understands, no problem. We can now look at the space of continuous functions on 0, 1. Okay? Look at now this space itself. The collection of all continuous functions on 0, 1. Now, I have not defined integral yet, but everybody knows that a continuous function I can find the integral. Okay, somehow or the other feels like there's a. So, there is no problem about integrating such functions. And on this, I define now different metrics. dp, the distance between two functions, is now defined as mod ft minus gt to the power of p. Now f is continuous, g is continuous, the power of p is continuous, therefore that is integrable, and then all these things. So for 1 less than or equal to p less than infinity, this is a metric, and that equal to infinity is that case, maximum now. Okay, these are all the 1 less than or equal to p less than infinity. It turns out is not complete. This is not a complete metric space. Now it is then we go back and look at, we started with the rational numbers and we had the metric modulus x minus y. Okay? D of xy was modulus of x minus y. This was not a complete metric space. Now, it was trying to complete this space, gave us the real numbers. what was the way we completed this metric space? So we did complete this metric space. How did we do it? We took Cauchy sequences and we defined equivalence relation between Cauchy sequences, and then those equivalence classes formed a space on which you could define the metric, and that is the real number. So the real numbers were obtained as equivalent classes of rational number sequences. So the same process we can adopt now. We can complete this space. Procedure same. There you took equivalence classes of rational, you took Cauchy sequences of rational numbers. Now you take Cauchy sequences of continuous functions. There you define equivalence, here you define equivalence. That equivalence relation gave an equivalence class. This equivalence relation will give an equivalence class. Exactly same construction, no difference at all. And you will get the completed version. What you get is the so-called LP0. That's all. So it's essentially the completion of the space of continuous functions with respect to different metrics. You get all these different Lebesgue spaces. And what this really says is, you may be talking about very complex Lebesgue measurable functions and all. What is it? They are very close to continuous functions. Eventually I am going to get them as limits of continuous functions. So you might have gone far, but you are not gone far. You are still keeping one foot in the continuous functions, because that's where you are very firm, on firm grounds, and then try to put your leg as far as possible and see what are all other things I can sweep. And these are these LP functions that I can get. So these continuous functions form at the base. But if you look at it really historically, again, go back to the classical old age when science began. All physical laws were, first stage level of laws were power laws. Something varied as x squared, x cubed, x to the power of 4, x to the power of 5. That is the first stage of physical laws that they were trying to fix. Then they said this is not enough, I will put them, superpose such things. Then they got the polynomials. And they were not enough, and then the polynomials were completed in a sense. You got continuous functions. Okay? Because every continuous function can be approximated uniformly by polynomials. That is the Weierstrass's theorem. And therefore, basically what you have done is, we have had only that x power n. We have made a lot of noise and gone to LP. We made a lot of noise, went to polynomials. It took a lot of, but we have spent a lot of time, 200 years or 300 years to formalize all these things. We made a lot of noise to go from power laws to polynomials, from polynomials to continuous functions, now from continuous functions to these Lebesgue measurable functions and LP spaces. Okay? But at the base of it, first level is the nice things are the continuous functions, at the base of it are the polynomials. So the polynomials approximate all these fellows as nicely as possible in the appropriate senses. If you are doing LP, then it's the LP approximation. If you are doing L2, it's the L2 approximations, and so on. So what it means is, if you give, we are like politicians. You give the microphone to them, without anything, they will talk for hours together. So we just had the x power n. We wrote books and books and books and books about real functions. Okay. And we are still writing. Because that small cell has grown, multiplied, manifold, created new cells. And we have a whole universe of phenomenal amount of functions that have come into the picture. But all of them at the ground state are very close to what we started with. In other words, we have not gone far. We look like we have gone far. But we haven't gone far because we are very closely, everything that you have got is approximated by these fellows very nicely. So therefore, we have a lot of things, but what we have learned is very small movement. We have a long way to go. We haven't understood functions completely. What we have understood are the polynomials, then those which are close to them, the continuous functions, and those which are close to them. We haven't made much headway about completely understanding functions. There are lots of functions that are not being understood. Because after all, the moment you say LP, you are already putting the restriction on measurability, even if you look at it from the Excel. But there are lots of non-measurable functions. We don't know anything about them. Okay. So there are this quote I always like, because this was Shakespeare, which I read when I was in BSc. In our days, we had to learn original version of Shakespeare, 2 in intermediate and 2 in the graduate level. And I had Hamlet in BSc, and the best quote I remember from Hamlet is not to be or not to be, not that. But there is once Hamlet tells to his friend Horatio, who is a character by name Horatio, tells him, there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. Horatio was a great philosopher, but all that you know is so small. There are many more things. There are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy. In our philosophy, you can make it. All these are there, but there is much more in this universe of mathematics of functions that we still don't know. Okay. So we have explored a lot. In other words, perhaps we may say, at best what we have explored is a first category. Not more. Okay. Continuous set in a dense setup. The whole memory will remain at a large number of points. So, so there is a lot of nice things even amongst bad things. Even if it were not continuous, there will be a lot of nice things about that function. So don't discard a function because it is not continuous. Keep it. That may be more interesting than a continuous function. Because that is something new. Continuous function everybody knows. Okay. Now we can say lower semi-continuous function everybody knows. So go to the next level. What do I get? So that's what their construction is. Okay. I don't know whether I should give you the proofs of this thing, but this is the line of thinking. Okay. Now there is one idea involved in here, which is what is known as, we talked about uniform convergence on a set S. Okay. There is another notion called uniform convergence at a point, or in a neighborhood of a point. It's usually called uniform convergence at a point. Now many of the proofs that Boas gave for this theorems were neatly written down once this concept of uniform convergence at a point was introduced. Okay. I will briefly discuss that and probably indicate the proof of theorem 2 and theorem 3. Theorem 1 is almost trivial. It's not difficult. Maybe I will indicate the proof of that also next class. So I will indicate the proof of theorem 1, 3 and 4, but before doing 4, I will introduce the other notion of uniform convergence at a point. So on the one hand, uniform convergence is very useful because lot of things are preserved under uniform convergence. Continuity is preserved, integrals are preserved, but of course differentiation is an additional ball game. But what little bit extra hypothesis differentiation is also preserved. So a lot of things are preserved in the limit, and therefore all this exchange of the limit and the limiting function, limiting with all left and right you do, it's allowed. But at the same time, even if you don't have uniform convergence, there is a lot of things that you can do. Okay. I think I'll stop here and then indicate the proof of these things.